Well, thanks for joining us, Kevin, here at SISTRIX. You're a very experienced SEO, or should we say digital growth engineer. You're an investor as well, and you've worked both in Germany and the USA, two notable companies. I spotted on your LinkedIn profile, G2 and Shopify recently. I'm going to try and squeeze some of your knowledge out in the next 20 minutes. But first of all, why don't you give us a quick 60 seconds about Kevin Indig?
Sure. And thanks, Steve. It's great to be here with you and SISTRIX. Kind of back to the roots for me. It was the first SEO tool that I used. And so the quick 60 seconds about me is I've spent over 12 years now in SEO. I've kind of dabbled outside of it as well and took on different growth topics. But I've been born and raised in Germany, lived in the US for the last 8 years, worked for companies like Shopify, G2, Atlassian, and a couple of others. And have really, really doubled down on SEO strategy, growth strategy over the last couple of years. And I also have a podcast called TechBound and a weekly newsletter called Growth Memo.
Excellent. That's the 60 seconds from Kevin. Well, let's get into the e-tail stuff and let's think about the multiple channels that a retail site can use in customer acquisition and sales acquisition. How big is the organic channel for most retailers? I have a follow-up question. I won't ask it just yet. How big is the organic channel for retailers in most cases?
Yeah, part of the question is how big is organic for e-tail? And then the other question is how big could it be? And those two differ quite a lot. So on average, taking every type of company into the same bucket, from small retailers to the really large brands, it's about 25 to 30%. However, we see retailers that can make up to over 50% of their overall sales from organic traffic. And I think that's the interesting bit, is how far can you take it if you do everything right?
Yeah, it's not small. It's not insignificant. Yeah. How is it viewed at board level, do you think?
Board level is tricky. I would say most board level or board executives or board members have rarely heard about SEO. Maybe they know what it means. However, I do also expect that the topic of SEO will be more interesting for retailers and boards in the future because it's a relatively low cost channel with pretty strong returns. Right? It's typically high intent traffic, doesn't cost much, it's scalable. So I think the situation today is going to be very different from the situation in maybe the next 12 to 24 months.
Right. So maybe more investment in organic SEO over the next
more
period.
Investment and more, more narrative around how retailers and e-tailers lean on SEO to reduce costs but still deliver. Because the reality right now, Steve, is that a lot of venture capital companies, private equity companies, just companies in general, need to do a lot more with a lot less. And that typically always plays into the hands of SEO. The big question is, do you have the right expertise and do you have enough buy-in from the executive level to execute on a strategy?
Yeah. One of the things that dropped out of some of the data we were looking at recently is the way that different types of content work on website. The typical commercial intent content, red shoes how much, or red shoes lowest price. But also the knowledge content was a very significant one for me. We saw retail sites doing B2C sales, direct to customer sales, having knowledge content on as well. So very, really early journey touch points for customers. But there aren't many people. There aren't many examples out there. Why do you think retailers aren't really doing that? Is it because they're maybe not good at doing that? It's not core business, or it's just an opportunity that they haven't grabbed hold of yet?
It's a great question. I think there's a lot to be gained from informational content. The way that I explain it to myself, or my mental model, is always that if you don't have any informational content on your site at all, it's almost like walking into a store with nobody to help you out, right?
That's exactly the way I think of it as well. Yeah.
It's like the Amazon store where you don't even have somebody at checkout, but the store just, films you and tracks you and knows what product you pick, and you just take and you walk out. Yeah. That's that kind of scenario for me, and that works to a certain degree, right? But in my mind, to break through a plateau that you eventually hit, you want to add more informational content. And we can dive a bit deeper into that as well. But to come back to your question of why don't more retailers or sites do that in general, I think it's because it is harder to attribute to revenue. So the kind of the benefit of being an e-tailer, of having an online store, is that this is one of the few occasions where organic traffic can often lead to revenue, and you have that attribution very clearly, which is also one of the reasons why you find so many SEOs in e-commerce or in e-tail, is because it is so clearly attributable to actual revenue and sales. Whereas at SaaS companies or enterprise companies, you have much longer sales cycles. There's not a direct conversion. It's much trickier. And that to me is also the reason for why informational content is not as leveraged as it could be, because now all of a sudden you have earlier touch points in user journey from potential customers, and you need to make sure you can track that user journey over a longer period of time. It's not impossible, and sometimes people will come and they will start or they will visit the site through informational content and then buy right away, but it's rare. So most of the time, longer sales cycles, harder to attribute, and that's why content is under-leveraged.
Isn't there enough case out there already, though, because of sites like Wirecutter being bought by New York Times? I think the Wall Street Journal have just started a Buy Best series. Good Housekeeping is a long-term model, and they're using basically affiliate, and then they're building a business on it. So clearly, if they can survive, does it need to be attributable? I mean, if it works, it's going to work, right? Surely.
Yes, and even in e-tail, there are some great case studies. From the large e-tailer that does that really well is Chewy, for example, pet food, and we can talk a little bit more about what they do to be successful. And even smaller ones, a couple that I like to mention are matcha.com or bulletjournal.com. These are relatively small companies, and they do a fantastic job in getting the right information in front of the customer to accelerate the journey to buy and to provide good customer service online.
Yeah, that's a good point. Acceleration. So there's the touch points, the brand aspect of having this content, and the fact that you can accelerate the purchase. Although I'm sure there are people that would say, no, the affiliate model brings us enough traffic. We don't have to worry about the knowledge content.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you can't expect great content to work in a bad container. So you can build brilliant content, but if the website is just not technically working, SEO from an SEO perspective, things are not going to go as fast as possible. What do you think are the most important factors for retailers in that respect? What do they need to focus on in terms of technical SEO to make their platform correct?
I love that question, because the way that I think about ranking signals is really industry context and keyword specific, right? So it makes intuitive sense. Somebody searching for a topic in finance, for example, might value different signals than somebody buying from an online store, right? On the one hand, security or secure connection might be more important, whereas on the other hand, it might be images or links or speed. So generally, the experience that I have from looking at over 2 million online stores at Shopify is that user experience is incredibly important. So then we're talking about core web vitals, design, layout, navigation, all these kind of, sometimes a bit fuzzy factors that help people make a decision very quickly and help people orient themselves. So it would be my number one thing. And I wouldn't say that for other industries, for example, right? So I wouldn't say core web vitals are that important in SaaS based on my experience. And then all the kind of basic on-page stuff, titles, some on-page content, which I'm very much in favor of. There are some people who say that, it doesn't matter if you have text on categories, but I've run several A/B tests that always show that category pages with actual text on the page performs better. And then one of my favorites is internal linking. Whenever I tuned internal linking on pretty much any site, but especially scalable sites like e-tailers, I always see a positive impact. And then last one is all the rich snippet and snippet optimization around that. So do you have reviews, FAQs, delivery times, all these kind of things? And to round it up, a fifth one that I would mention are any visuals. I strongly believe that visuals are going to become so much more important in e-tail SEO in the future. We're not talking about images, but also videos, and then all the ways to present a product. I think that's going to become a differentiator, and I think Google is going to really lean into rewarding great visuals.
So let me put that another way. Is it worth companies thinking about that last 3% improvement in page performance, page speed performance, or is it really not worth it?
I'm not going to give you the classic SEO answer, classic consultant
No,
answer.
I don't want that answer.
Here's the scenario. It is worth it if everything else has been taken care of, which is rarely the case.
Yeah.
So the question to me would be, has there been enough time spent on title optimization, internal link optimization, content optimization? My experience and my understanding of Core Web Vitals and page experience is that it is first of all, it's one of the few times where user experience is actually quantified, which is quite new. And two, it's one of the first times where Google says we want sites to hit a certain threshold. It is an absolute value and not a relative value. So being faster than your competitors only helps you so much. And instead, Google really wants you to hit certain thresholds in terms of the 3 Core Web Vital metrics. So my answer would probably be no. And I would reserve some exceptions.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about expertise now. The data that I've looked at recently, there's a couple of great examples of the retail sites that have the knowledge content. And yet the knowledge content has no author. It seems a little bit wishy-washy, but it's damn working, and it's clearly working. Now, why is this? Do you think this is just an area where there is an opportunity for some people to come in with, experts to fill this sort of, to link to this graph, this knowledge graph, to help Google understand that it really is expert content, or is it in some areas just not worth it, just not important?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in my experience, EAT or EAT depends on a couple of different factors. What's interesting is that recently, with the announcement of the helpful content update, Google has published a lot of information around how they look at domains and how they value the quality of content on domains across the board, which is quite new, and I'm not sure it got enough spotlight. Maybe that comes later.
Yeah.
But I think Google has a good understanding of what topics a domain covers and what backlinks a domain receives, which are the 2 main factors for EAT to me. But you still see retailers or retailers like a Chewy that leverage, that really lean into AT, that have content hubs with pet content created by veterinarians who do a good job in highlighting that and for who it seems to work. So in my mind, I think it can be a competitive advantage, if not from an SEO perspective, then surely from a branding or user perspective. If you see as a reader that the content has been written by a doctor, or at least reviewed by a doctor, even if it doesn't have a direct influence on SEO, I still think it makes a lot of sense to invest that money and time, because as a user, I just trust that brand so much more. So Chewy is a very interesting use case of an e-tailer that actually has done the work and for who it works really well. And so for me, I think it can be a competitive advantage. And it also depends on what kind of topic we're talking about. I think, for example, in the health space, when we talk about domains like WebMD or Healthline, I don't think it's feasible to work without author attribution. And again, how much incremental impact on SEO there is or user experience is a different question. But I think in e-commerce, because the content game is not as competitive yet, there's still room for kind of like low EAT type of scenarios.
Okay, yeah. I'll name the website. It's B&Q, DIY.com. It's a big home improvements DIY shop in the UK. Their knowledge content, there's no evidence of any authorship at all. So it's interesting. So yeah, maybe there's an opportunity for someone to compete with DIY.com there. Let's go to the other end of that scale of expertise, because I want to bring in AI now. Let's talk about a couple of sort of trend topics that are happening right now. And AI relates to this EAT that we've just been talking about, and the currently rolling out helpful content update, of which on the 31st of August it is today, which is 7 days in. We've seen no evidence of any changes. I mean, I had a look at the data this morning. You've been looking at the data as well, right?
Yeah. Crickets.
We'll wait and see what happens there. Where does AI fit in? Now, Google doesn't talk directly about AI when it talks about the helpful content update, but it's alluding to the fact that it might be at risk. Do you think there's a space for AI? Well, let's just start with that question. Do you think there's a space for AI?
I think there's a space for AI content. And this is one of the cases where I actually have changed my mind. And you can trace it on my blog. I don't delete or change any articles. So you can go back and see how I thought about it 2 years ago. And so my thought back then was that because everybody will have access to the same tools, everybody can quote unquote create the same type of content, and Google will just devalue it because it's so similar, and then spend more time weighing other factors like links, like user experience, brand, et cetera, et cetera. And that has not really turned out to be the case. What you actually see today is that there are sites that leverage AI content in a very helpful way, and that content performs well. And there are a couple of reasons for that and why I think that works out. One of them is that in my mind, it shouldn't matter as much who creates the content. The quality should be the only factor that really makes a difference. And I've seen some really good AI content. Now, the question is what type of content? And this is in my mind where the conversation is too one-sided, it's too black and white. And I think we need a bit more nuance. So in general, I distinguish between three types of content that perform well in search, or that should perform well in search. One is contextual content. And this is where we talk about product descriptions. What is articles? Very high level, not a lot of complexity. And it helps users and searchers make sense of what they're searching for, what they're seeing in front of them, right? It can even be stuff like meta descriptions. And that's where I think AI content works really, really well. Glossaries are another great example. Then there's what I call deep content, which is where you really need a human to synthesize something, to give an answer to a very complex topic. And I haven't yet seen any AI content that was able to do that in a good enough way, or at least with many hours of reviews and rewriting and editing. And then last type of content is more the thought leadership type of style, which I call narrative content, which is much more data stories, it's case studies, those kind of things that might not target a keyword, but might attract a lot of backlinks simply because they're new, they're fresh, they give data, they tell a story. And so to me, we're at the stage where that first type of content, contextual content, can actually be handled by AI. And why not? Why shouldn't it be? It's often content that writers are not that excited about, and where humans don't contribute that much more value, right? Because there's only so much you can say about what is finance automation. You're not going to tell an exciting story, right? Yeah. Maybe how finance automation changes the business landscape. That could be, right, one thing or a topic where you can add a lot of color and data and all that kind of stuff. So there is a place for AI content. I'm in favor of it. And then the big question is going to be, how will that evolve over time, and what differentiators will companies have to make that content better than anything else out there? Yeah. And this is where I think the inputs are critical, and it's really all about what inputs can companies provide.
Yeah. You just seen out the corner of your eye. You've attracted a cat.
This is actually a cat.
We've got cat content going on here. There's a cat. One of our neighbours' cats has just walked in. I don't know if you can get it on the camera. But,
I wasn't sure if I trust my brain for a second. Is that a cat? Cat meme factory.
Excellent. So the second topic I want to talk about related to trends, and you mentioned it earlier, is video content. Now we know video works on YouTube. There's people that run businesses doing that. What about video and how it adds to content for organic SEO? Does it give us an advantage at all?
My take on this is that there's no direct advantage. I think one of the common arguments that I see over and over is by adding a video to your content, you keep users on the page and Google will kind of, understand that and reward the content. I don't think that's the case, but reality is that Google shows more and more video carousels or video snippets in the search results, especially on mobile. And that to me means that organic or classic blue links, right, organic snippets compete with video carousels, and it's an unfair advantage video has because it's a format that's much, much easier to consume and faster to learn from. So if you as a business have to or face the decision, should we go into video or not, I would say you absolutely want to get into video. You just need to take into account that users might click on the video snippet and you might feed your YouTube channel. And it's very, very difficult to bring people from YouTube back to your website. So now you're feeding into an ecosystem that is removed from your website, but I would still take that. I would still cash that in because, first of all, I think video is a great way to build trust and credibility with users. And if they have a purchase intent, they will still come back to you, right?
Yeah.
But video is a great way or great opportunity for you to present yourself in a different way. And once you captured an audience, it's much easier than having to compete against 9 other snippets or 7 other snippets on organic search, however many show up. So you want to go after video. You have to take into account that it might have a short-term detrimental impact on conversion rates, but a long-term beneficial impact on conversion rates. That's how I think about it.
That's very interesting. And let's hope that this video does something to that effect as well, because that's exactly why we're doing this.
By SISTRIX, by SISTRIX.
Is there an opportunity for video for everyone? Or are there going to be like faces, those sort of people that you see all the time, the experts, and also when the production quality goes up, how do people compete? Remember back in 2007 when I started doing YouTube videos, you could get in with the crummiest video, but the quality has just risen and risen and risen and risen, and you really have to have a great production these days. Is it for everyone, or is it the cost going to be excluding some people?
The costs are still, or the production quality is still a barrier to entry in my mind. You know, this kind of setup, this production that we have right here, right now, is not something that everybody does. And so it can be a competitive advantage. And when it comes to the question of, do you need a face, do you need a person to be kind of the face for a brand or not, I think both can work, right? You either have a person that is front and center, that is an anchor or a reference point for the audience, but it can also be something else, like the type of content or the type of video. Is it short form, long form? Is it very produced or not produced at all? I remember this interesting use case at G2. One of our moneymaker keywords, incredibly important topic for the company, showed a video carousel, and one of our main competitors was ranking at the top of this kind of video carousel, and it was just a person standing in front of a whiteboard for 5 minutes explaining the topic, and it was an 8-year-old video. Wow. So, you know, and eventually we kind of tapped into that, and we beat him with a better produced video that is more up to date. But it just goes to show how organic search is not just 10 blue links anymore, or it's not even 10 blue links anymore. It could be 6, 7, or 8 blue links. Blue links. But it's all the things that happen in the SERP, and you as a company want to think about, where can I get a competitive advantage, and what are easier ways to compete at all. Another example would be image carousels, where it might be so much easier to create an enticing graphic instead of having to build the links, create the content, and then slowly creep up in ranks.
Right, let's move on from video and move on a little bit to international stuff. I'm interested, because you've worked in Germany and USA, and I have some opinion on this. I want to hear whether you see any differences in the way they do SEO in Germany compared to the USA.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, I had the unique opportunity to be born and raised in Germany, and then when in my mid-20s, I came to the US and lived in the Silicon Valley. And I do have the impression that Germans tend to be more technical, more engineers, right? They love the technical audits and are really good at it. They have a very strong technical understanding. That also helped me when I came to the US. All of a sudden, people were like, wow, you're so technical. And I was like, I don't think so, compared to other Germans. And then on the other hand, I think in the US, the topic of content and content marketing is much more front and center, and then marketing overall. Of course, you have exceptions, right? I don't want to say there's no technical SEOs in the US. You certainly find a couple, and there's nobody who's good at content marketing in Germany. But I do see those two differences, and I feel like, you know, the best of both worlds would make a very strong.
Exactly. We've already agreed that, you know, it's not about just doing one thing; it's about doing everything. So, a good exchange. This couch needs to have more international representation on it, so we learn across the borders. Kevin Indig, thank you so much for joining us. You've got a podcast and a newsletter and a Twitter account. Tell us where they are.
Yeah, sure. On Twitter, I'm at Kevin_Indig. My newsletter is called Growth Memo, and my podcast is called Tech Bound. Thanks so much for having me, Steve.
Excellent, thanks. That's a wrap.
Love it. Good stuff.